Good evening. It's wonderful to be back together and to have an opportunity to study God's Word a little bit more, to brighten our lives, hopefully, and draw us closer to Him. As I was making out my calendar for this year, I decided that on the second Sunday nights, the first Sunday nights we're going to do a song each month, and on the second one we're going to talk about Christian evidences. And I think that's a vital subject that we don't often talk about, but it's one that we need to. There was an old saying that said, when it absolutely, positively has to be there overnight. You remember that? That, of course, was Federal Express. Federal Express was a wonderkind of business. They were more, they were created to make sure that they could get packages overnight, and they became one of the most successful companies in the United States history, basically because they did what they said they were going to do. Now, through the years, they've gone from overnight express shipping to shipping of all kinds. They've bought print shops, and now they own Kinko's, and so they have dropped the slogan of absolutely, positively has to be there overnight because they do so much more now. But FedEx still, its main business is shipping packages. Last year, in 2021, it was estimated that FedEx shipped about 3.4 billion packages. That's basically a package for every other person on the planet. That's a lot of shipping. How do they handle so many packages? Have you ever thought about that? How is it that one company can handle 3.4 billion packages in a year? The answer is that their sorting facilities are equipped, they're designed to do exactly that. They're infused with computer brains that are precisely calibrated scanners and miles of conveyor belts and chain link belts that take packages from one end of the facility to another. It enters onto a belt, it gets scanned, it gets bumped and elevated and jostled until it ultimately reaches the proper terminal that will take it to its final destination. Can you imagine the precision, the workload of those who are simply called to make sure the computers work properly every day? When a belt breaks, when a computer goes down, the entire endeavor just stops. But the thing is that as amazing as that industry is, it cannot compare to the precision and the communication and the package handling of a single human cell. When I was a boy in grade school and junior high school, I was fascinated by science. And one thing that I always turned to that just amazed me was the human cell and what happens in the human cell. Each cell carries on a process similar, we might say, to a shipping facility, but on a very microscopic scale. Instead of moving teddy bears and summer sausage for Christmas presents, it moves life. Inside each cell are these organelles. That's what we learned when I was a kid. Small organs, as it were, that perform precise tasks, much like the various systems at a Federal Express hub. Every facility needs some sort of an office of information that is stored and routed and meted out to the company, to the employees, or to the workers to make sure that the work is getting done. The computers in this office receive and read and redirect packages to their destinations. When we're looking at the cell, it contains a main control office as well, and it's called the nucleus of the cell. Inside is DNA. We're not even going to talk about DNA other than to mention it tonight, but man, we could go into an entire lesson on the intricacies of DNA itself. But it's inside the nucleus of the cell. It contains all the genetic material, the stuff that is left at crime scenes, DNA, so that we can identify. But DNA is more than just a clue on a criminal investigation show. It contains information for the code of life, hair color, disposition to disease, eyelash length. All of this is determined by DNA, by our genes. And genes are a sequence of amino acids. You remember that term? We learned that in health class in 6th grade. Amino acids that make up our genes or make up protein strands. And those protein strands are used by each cell. And because there's different kinds of proteins that are going into the cell, it is the nucleus that says, okay, we need that kind, but not that kind. We need those nucleotides, but not those nucleotides. Can you imagine the kind of precision that takes in order to make sure that all the cells agree? What color your hair is going to be, how tall you're going to grow. Those determining factors. The amino acid sequences determined by the information contained in the DNA. Hence, the DNA is a routing information that is stored in the nucleus, in the office of the cell. But it goes beyond that. Routing machines in the facility scan packages and use conveyor belts, pushers, and gates, and other devices to direct packages based upon information received from the office. In the cell, that's the ribosomes. These little pieces of cell or organelles that reach out and they have the information they need about what kind of protein strand it needs. And so they go out and they're the ones that are selected. They get the information from the office. They're looking at the different proteins that are available. And it says, I need this kind or I need that kind. I'm going to leave this kind behind. That's what the ribosomes do. And they're an important part of the cell, especially in replication. So they collect and move packets of amino acids and proteins based upon the information provided by the DNA. Now, the collected amino acids get transferred to other parts of the cell, or even other organelles within the cell. For example, the what's called endoplasmic reticulum. When I was in the 10th grade, we had a test on the parts of the human cell. And there was a question about what shape is the endoplasmic reticulum. And it was a question, and I didn't know what to say, so I drew a picture of endoplasmic reticulum, and it looked spot on. Perfect. And my best friend Mark didn't draw. He said spiral, which is wrong. It's not even close to right. A spiral begins in the middle, and it doesn't connect to the outside. It's just wrong. And he got full credit, and I missed it. To this day, it chaps my hide. And every time I see Mr. Haddock, my science teacher, I remind him. And he always says, yes, but you drew it, and it said, do not draw. Well, I don't remember it saying, do not draw. Maybe it did. But the endoplasmic reticulum reaches out and it grabs the ribosomes out of the cytoplasm of the cell and it says, okay, we need this one now. Now we need this one. Puts them in order. Besides the endoplasmic reticulum, there's these pallet jacks and lifts called the Golgi bodies or the Golgi apparatus. And they also pick up the ribosomes and they take them over to the endoplasmic reticulum to transport the proteins and the information that the DNA needs inside the nucleus of the cell. They're like the tools that move containers around the facility. And again, this is all on a microscopic level. Can you imagine? Microscopic. You don't even see these things happening. While all the protein synthesis continues, there's a cleanup crew, the janitors, we might say, of the cells. They move around picking up debris and unused proteins, and they expel them outside the cells. These cleaning and recycling organelles are called lysosomes. Like sweeping and mopping crews, they keep the area within the cell clean from clutter, allowing other processes to continue unabated. Every facility has storage closets where extra parts and cleaning supplies and the cobwebs are stored. And within the microcosm of the cell, those are the vacuoles. They serve like little closets. They store cellular material, proteins, and other things that are needed, not just for the processes of life, but also for the processes of cleanup for the cell even. They store this material and they help with pressure regulation. Imagine if all these things continued to build up in the cell and it started to get bigger and bigger until the cell wall was breached and the cell was no more, couldn't function. And so they regulate the inside pressure of the cell. And finally, everything has to run, because without power, the belts don't move, the scanners don't scan, and information stalls. The whole facility will screech to a halt. Cells, like facilities, require energy. And those, of course, are provided by the mitochondria. These are the power source organelles. They take energy molecules, break them down, and release the energy to the cell to keep the facility running. What does all that tell us? It tells us that there is a phenomenal process going on inside of every cell in your body. And you have billions of cells in your body. The DNA strands, I know I wasn't going to talk about DNA, but this is another great one. The DNA strands in your body range in length from about 50 million nucleotide pairs to up to as many as 260 million nucleotide pairs. You have 23 pairs of chromosomes to begin with. How long would it take if you started like a zipper at one end of that DNA strand and zipped up all the proteins, the amino acids and everything until you got to the end of the strand? If you've got 50 million of those that have to do, but it won't happen. So one of the things that DNA does is it has two enzymes on the DNA, primase and polymerase. Primase attaches to the DNA molecule at different points of the strand. And it says, start here. And then polymerase comes in, and it starts at one of those points, and it zips down to the next point. And it puts together those DNA pairs, or those nucleotide pairs. I want you to try this next time you're putting on a button-up shirt. Just randomly grab a button somewhere in the middle and a hole and put them together. Do you think you'll get it right every time? Look, I always start at the top, and I still don't get it right every time. But those processes are happening millions of times in a second. And very rarely does it ever make a mistake. One of the things that the polymerase does is it reads the information, proofreads, making sure that the nucleotides, adenine, guanine, cytosine, and thymine, making sure that they're lining up like they're supposed to. And when it finds a mistake, it corrects it. And that's not happening at one end of the strand until it goes to the other. That would take too long. 260 million? No. It's happening all along the strand at the same time. And we're talking about one button of a shirt and trying to get it right. That's amazing. When it comes down to it, we're talking about design. There are two basic ideas about the origin of the world. One is supernaturalism and the other is naturalism. Naturalism sees the world as a self-contained system of matter and energy that operates by unbroken laws of nature. Everything happens by chance and by necessity. That is, we have what we had because we got lucky. Not once, not twice, but billions and billions of times we got lucky. I mean, we're talking about the ability for life to exist even. And that first organism, they say by chance, cropped up here. Okay. But in order for it to reproduce with another of its species, it also had to crop up over here somewhere and be close enough to the first one that somehow they could find each other. The impossibility of that has forced naturalists to say, well, we have a universe that is 13 billion years old. And yet even that doesn't really answer the problem they have. On the other side of the coin is supernaturalism. Supernaturalism sees the world as a specially created system of matter and energy, governed by natural laws, designed and empowered by a supernatural force. That there is something governing them. It is the puppet master pulling the strings of natural law. Everything happens by design and by will. Each of these represents what we call a worldview, or a way of looking at the world. There are beginning assumptions, we might say, about what we think of the world. The naturalist, of course, discounts the very idea of a supernatural being, and therefore must interpret all facts of the universe, no matter how ridiculous it fits into their system, as being a natural occurrence of chance and necessity. On the other side of the coin, the supernaturalist sees the world with its natural laws and explains it that there are supernatural forces at work as well. A worldview seeks to answer three basic questions: one of origin, one of predicament, and one of resolution. We think about the idea of supernaturalism. The origin, according to supernaturalism, is that there was a purposeful creation. It was designed to be exactly what it's supposed to be. And it implies a purpose for us, for our families, for our work, for our morality, anything of this world. There is a purpose behind what we are called to do. The predicament is that we fail to meet our purpose. Now, in a natural world, that's okay. You just mess up and you go on. But in a supernatural world that has given us purpose, when we fail that purpose, we are in sin. According to the supernatural view, then, there must come resolution. And that resolution is in Jesus. God answers our predicament. He deals mercifully with our sin. Redemption is our resolution. But if we flip over to the other side, to that of naturalism, naturalism says the origins, that humans are an accident of nature. You're an accident. We might give it grace and call it a happy accident, but it's just an accident, the result of mindless evolutionary processes. So let's tell our kids that. From the time they're in the 3rd grade, and the 4th grade, and the 5th grade, and the 6th grade. Let's put it in their movies and their television shows. Let's let them watch documentaries that remind them that you are just an accident, that you are the result of mindlessness. That creates an entirely different predicament. In naturalism, the predicament is that evil is the natural consequence of evolution as it shapes our environments to be competitive and selfish and cruel. And so when we behave that way, guess what? That's how we're supposed to behave. That's our predicament. And the idea that as we look at selfish people and cruel people, that it's somehow wrong, or that we shouldn't be doing that, we are forced to look at our lives and realize that we are ridden with cognitive and emotional and physical disorder all around us. That's our predicament. And the resolution is good luck. Luck got you here. Maybe, just maybe, luck can get you out of it. We must redeem ourselves, we say, through advances in science and technology and therapy and drugs. And yet these very same people who hold to such naturalism do not believe that you have the free will to think of anything. Chance and necessity is all you have. And so we must solve our own problems without the ability to do so, and a track record, according to them, of about 1 million years of failure. But maybe the next generation will figure it out. At the core of the debate is whether the universe exhibits a design or is it sheer randomness. Michael Shermer, who is a skeptic and an evolutionist, was writing a book, How We Believe. And he commissioned a poll. He actually paid pollsters to go out and meet 1,000 people and ask them why they believe in God. There were other questions, but this was one of them. Why do you believe in God? And the number one answer was the complexity and design of the universe. It's because we see it. We ain't no dummy. We understand that this complexity, whether we're talking about a cell or we're talking about a FedEx hub in Memphis, there is a design, and it's important. A couple of weeks ago, I quoted Richard Dawkins. We're going to do it again, this time from his book, The Blind Watchmaker, Why the Evidence of Evolution Reveals a World Without Design. He said, biology, and remember, you're studying biology in high school. Your kids are studying biology. This is a world-renowned evolutionist, philosopher. His information gets put in textbooks throughout the world. What's the definition of biology? Biology is the study of complicated things that give the appearance of having been designed for a purpose. They're not designed for a purpose. No. They give the appearance of being designed. Francis Crick, one of the co-discoverers of DNA, Watson and Crick model, the double helix model, wrote in his book about mad pursuit, said biologists must constantly keep in mind that what they see was not designed, but rather evolved. They've got to keep telling themselves that. You know why? It's because the deeper they look at it, the more designed it exhibits. And they have to remind themselves, I know that looks like it's been designed, but it's not. There's an old saying, if it walks like a duck, and it quacks like a duck, well, it must be a duck. If it looks like design, everywhere we go, it looks like design, it acts like design, it works like design. It must not or cannot possibly be design, right? That's what we're told to believe. Another man, Antony Flew, who was an English professor at Reading University, for 5 decades was a world-renowned atheist. And he lectured and he wrote and he debated for the cause of evolution for those 50-plus years. And then one day, late in his life, he changed his mind and he said, there's a God. Now, mind you, he didn't convert to Christianity, but he said, there's a God. This happened somewhere in the early 90s, 1990s. He was asked many times over, what changed your mind? I mean, this is a man, 50-plus years of evolutionary and atheistic understanding, one of the most brilliant and recognized men in atheist philosophy. What changed his mind? And he said, I think the DNA material has done, or what the DNA material has done, is show that intelligence must have been involved in getting these extraordinarily diverse elements together. The enormous complexity by which the results were achieved looks to me like the work of intelligence. DNA. That's what he said. DNA finally convinced him that that was true, that there is a God. Why? It's because of intelligent design. Now, when we say intelligent design, I think sometimes we as Christians, we think, okay, here's God, and he created, and so there's this intelligence of design in what he's created. But really, the science of intelligent design does not begin with God. It begins with what we see. It begins with what has been created or what we are surrounded with. It begins with nature, and it sees that that nature exhibits patterns that are best explained as products of an intelligent cause rather than an undirected material process. See, understand this. Sometimes we talk about intelligent design and we think, oh, someone's convinced of intelligent design, they're going to obey the gospel. No, intelligent design only tells us there is a God. It doesn't tell us that it is the Christian God or a Jewish God or a Buddhist God or any other God. It simply tells us that based upon the science of observation, there has to be something beyond this natural world. That's important because not long ago there was a court case about a teacher in school who was teaching evolutionary principles as it was required by the textbook. But he started seeing more and more scientific articles in peer-reviewed journals that were dealing with intelligent design. And so in his class, he started telling people, or telling his students, high school students, that there is an alternate view of how the world came into existence. It's referred to as intelligent design. Here are some articles you might want to read. That, of course, hair-lipped someone in the class, and they wanted to make sure that they that didn't get taught anymore. It ended up in a court case, and the judge looked at it, and he said, intelligent design is great for theological discussion, but it is not science. Told him he can no longer give an alternate view, although technically he wasn't giving the alternate view. He was suggesting that there are alternatives. We cannot do that because the minds of our little children cannot discern because we have failed to teach them how to observe and think for themselves. The last thing we want them to do is actually think for themselves in public schools. And so we're going to take out everything that contradicts the narrative, the Darwinian narrative, that is taught as fact, 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 no matter how unprovable it is, no matter how unsustainable it is. So we have those who are looking at it and saying, this is not science. It's because the judge was already prejudiced, thinking intelligent design begins with the assumption that there's a God. And that's for theology and not for science, he said. But it's important for us to understand when we talk about intelligent design, we don't start with God. We start with what we observe right here. Forget about God, forget about Jesus, forget about sin, forget about these things. It's not a religious discussion. It is, in fact, a scientific one of observation. Now, once we do that, once we show that there is a God, then our next step is to say, okay, what God can do this? What is the evidence for God? In the 18th century, a man by the name of William Paley, he was a preacher and a philosopher, mathematician. Back then, people did everything. And Paley famously said, if we were walking through the field and we found a rock and we picked it up, we would look at its shape and its color and its size, its weight, and we would say that this is the result of natural forces. Wind, rain, catastrophes that happened in this area. It's the result of natural forces and chance that made this rock look this way and be found in this particular place. He said if we set that rock down and walk just a few more steps and we find a pocket watch in the same field, we would look at it and we would never think that wind and rain and catastrophe and chance and necessity somehow caused this watch to appear. We would look at it and we would instantly know someone has designed this watch. It's the famous watchmaker analogy. By the way, that's why Dawkins named his book the blind watchmaker. Because he was taking that famous argument of the watchmaker and saying that that does not necessarily follow. The natural universe must have order. We see it exhibited, but it's more than that. It actually has to have order. Imagine, as a scientist, measuring the temperature at which water boils today, and it hits right on the mark at 100 degrees Celsius. But tomorrow, when you measure it, it boils at 80. And the next day, it freezes at 90. Because there's chaos. There's no order to the laws, to what is happening in nature. You see, the very scientists who deny order rely on it in order to do their observation and their studies. Einstein, a pretty smart man in himself, said the most incomprehensible thing about the world is that it is comprehensible. That we can understand it and that we can know it. And you know what he referred to that as? He called that a miracle. Einstein believed in an intelligent creator. He said that's a miracle in itself. Too much about our world exhibits design, the fine-tuning of that design that allows life to even exist in this world. Planetary mechanics, tidal patterns, our elliptical order of our earth, the natural symbiosis between man and plant for food and for energy, for air. Simple organisms, complex organisms, the human cell and DNA. From the macrocosm to the microcosm. That brings us full circle. For you formed my inward parts. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the midst or in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw me unformed, or saw my unformed substance. In your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there was none of them. Psalm 139, verses 13 through 16. We come together and we praise God because we are fearfully and wonderfully made. And it is seen on so many levels. Tonight, if maybe you've fallen away, maybe you haven't fallen away, you're just feeling a little weak. You say, my faith needs a little bump, needs some encouragement. You know, that's why we're here as a family. We're here to help, to encourage, to strengthen. And so tonight, if you have a need to respond to the invitation for that, or maybe to become a child of God, we ask you to come while we stand and while we sing.